YouTube, and welcome to a Friday Reads, which is slightly extended because I didn't do one last week. So lots of books. Jerome Ferrari, The Principle, which is the first fiction book that I've read that was given to me by Mitchell Axler. I'll post the link to that unboxing video which this was contained. Diary of a Murderer by the Korean Kim Young-ha, which is 4 short stories, although one of them's 96 pages long. Does that make it short? Ingeborg, Bachmann's Malina, which is my first read German literature in 2020. Non-fiction, Heart of the Original by Steve Aylett, again sent to me by Mitchell Axler. Some poetry based on the Iliad, Christopher Logue's All Day Permanent Red, again sent by Mitchell. And what I'm not going to talk about in this video, which is Tim O'Brien in the Lake of the Woods. The reason I'm not going to talk about it in this one, I'm going to make a separate video, is A, because I've got a lot to say about it, and B, because it was a buddy read with Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. So I'm going to also talk about the buddy read there. So first on to The Principle, which is a novel based around the life and work of Werner Heisenberg, the inventor of the uncertainty principle in quantum physics. And I've got a reasonable grounding in physics, but you don't need, there's very little physics, if any, in here. There's the history of interwar physics, but not actual physical theorems. And it's divided into 3 parts, and I think with mixed success. So the first part is basically the young Heisenberg is the son of a mathematician, and he seems to be following his father's footsteps when he gets interested in physics. And his father is appalled because to him, maths is pure abstraction, whereas physics is somehow dirtied and sullied by the matter of the real world. And Heisenberg Jr. Sort of solves this because with the development of quantum physics, and in particular his uncertainty principle, he basically says, well, there's nothing at the heart of matter, there's no core, because you have all these, not atoms, but subparticles, subatoms, and you can't fix them in place. Either you can know their speed but not their position, or you can know their position but not their speed. You cannot know both, because the mere act of trying to observe and measure distorts because of the subjectivity of the observer who is brought in to observe. And so what he's done there is he's taken the core out of matter, which is what his father was always sort of objecting to. And the reason that Heisenberg Jr. sort of moved from maths to physics is because he felt there was a sort of poetry of physics, an elegance, a beauty at the heart of creation and of matter. So then it moves into the great sort of debate between physicists, between Einstein on one side and Niels Bohr on the other, where they were wrangling over the implications of what quantum physics meant. Heisenberg was very much in the Bohr camp, and Bohr sort of tutored and mentored him for a couple of years. And that's that part of it. When you compare the sort of the talk about the sort of the aesthetics and the beauty and the poetry of matter and the real world, when he talks about the Einstein v Bohr stuff, it's much more prosaic, it's much less involving, it is sort of more reportage. So that's the first section. Then section 2 there's very little to say about section 2. It's Heisenberg in the Second World War under the Nazis. And obviously a lot of his Jewish colleagues have either fled or been kicked out of German universities, which, Hitler managed to cut off his nose to spite his face by doing that, because he lost some of the best scientific minds under the Reich. And Heisenberg, his face, does he also flee like Schrödinger? Does he leave Germany, or does he stay? And he stays, again, because he sort of has this sort of poetic German soul that's sort of attached to the landscape of Germany, which of course has a fine tradition in literature in Germany, but also influenced the Nazis. And halfway through the war, he's approached by Speer. We want to develop a nuclear program, and we think you can make a contribution, because without that, Heisenberg himself might have been kicked out of his job or worse, because he's working on stuff that has been sort of theorised and brought to light by Jews. So that's the second part, but there's very little to say about it. It's completely uninvolving. Again, it's this sort of rather dry reportage stage, and I was sort of beginning to flounder a bit, but then we come to part 3, which is really sort of redeems this book and makes it a really interesting read. So it's coming to the end of the war and the German defeat, and 10 German scientists are captured and rounded up by the Allies, and they're sent over to Britain into the countryside where they're sort of under house arrest. But the British are bugging the house, and I know they did this with the top-ranking Nazis that they'd managed to arrest, and it seems they did it with these scientists as well, because they want to find out what they know about rockets and nuclear technology. And what they record is less, the useful information about that, but much more interesting about these scientists are split in their, they sort of have cognitive dissonance, because on the one hand they're furious that the Americans beat them to it to launch the atomic bomb, but on the other hand they sort of feel that they've been spared the moral compromise of having to use the atomic bomb, and they think the Americans have dirtied science, it's the end of physics, all this sort of stuff. But they also talk about their own sort of guilt or denial of guilt in terms of collaborating and supporting the Nazi regime during the war, whether they actively supported them, as a couple of them did, or they just sort of carried on with their work, which just happened to help the Nazi regime. And I thought all of that was brilliantly done, the different subtle shades of guilt, non-guilt, denial, allegiance. And I thought that was really, really strong. And that sort of passes over into a view from the 1990s. The Berlin Wall has just collapsed, where a putative author, lecturer figure, who has researched into Heisenberg, but is not Jerome Ferrari himself. But this character sort of draws out the, in his search for Heisenberg through, documentation, is saying that basically the work of Heisenberg and the sort of quantum and nuclear physics has ushered in a modern world of steel and glass skyscrapers, algorithms, managing financial markets and taking it away from sort of the control of humans and sent that to computers. And it's very much a sort of the template of the modern world. And I think that was a point really, really well made. So a bit of a mixed bag, but, I got a lot out of this book. It wasn't quite literary enough for me. And I don't know if that's down to the translation, which is by, who translated this? Howard Curtis. I don't think it is down to the translation. I think that's how it's written. There are little glimpses, as I say, of a sort of literary soul and a metaphorical soul. They are sort of referred to at points in this book. But otherwise, it's just a little bit sort of dry and uninvolving. So I gave this 4 out of 5. On to Diary of a Murderer by Kim Young-Hart. It's 4 short stories. The first is just under 100 pages long, and it's perhaps the most interesting of them. It's a serial killer in Korea who has hit the age of 70. He hasn't been a serial killer since a serious accident affected his brain chemistry. Sort of seemed to, knock those urges out of him. So he's sort of settled down for the last 20 years. But at age 70, he has started to develop Alzheimer's. And what this story is, I think, is a really good sort of representation of just how Alzheimer's affects you from day to day, and what memories go and how, and what the functions of daily life that you can't do. There are elements of that film, Memento, because he's writing notes to himself and he's tape recording stuff. And I think that was a lot more involving that than when he's talking about his past career as a murderer. The story is set up as he has one more murder to commit, 20 years later. It's really important to him that he does this. But he can't, his memories, blanks in his memory means that, he can't quite do it. He doesn't quite have the wherewithal to do it. And, you know, it was really building up quite nicely. And I thought the ending was really sort of lame and rather, you know, mundane and rather lost the energy of the story up to that point. But that was, I thought, was a good read. And then the other three, I was completely indifferent to. Very much sort of in the line of Ted Chiang's The Story of My Life and Other Stories, where the two top stories in there were standout and the rest were, you know, just really sort of uninvolving. Very similar to this. So one is about the effects of a child kidnapping. One is about the effects of a guy sort of bumps into a woman in the park. She tells him how unhappy she is with her husband. And then this guy is later attacked by a guy who he assumes is the husband, but actually isn't. It's someone else in her life. But again, it's sort of quite uninvolving. But it's particularly the last story where my heart sunk, because it's called The Writer. It's about a writer who basically is sort of fallen out of love with writing or has got writer's block. He has no desire to write, but there's the pressure coming in that he's had an advance, he's missed his deadline, either he's going to have to repay the advance, which he can't, or he's going to have to produce something. That's the setup. But, you know, he sort of goes to New York. He's in the flat of his publisher. His publisher's estranged wife turns up because she still has the key to the house. And somehow, as a muse, that inspires him. He has a hard-on, which she relieves, but it's not about the sex, because the fact that he's got a hard-on puts him in this sort of febrile writing state. And it's, you know, that's such a tired trope. And just to give you two examples of really bad writing, I think. So a writer always wants to hear his readers' opinions, whether the readers are naked or fully dressed. Well, that's a male fantasy. And then we have, planning a murder is a little like contemplating immigration. Once you start thinking about it, you can't stop. I don't even understand what that simile is. Planning a murder is a little like contemplating immigration. When you say contemplating immigration, do you mean thinking about the concept of immigration that, you know, sort of racists and bigots are so opposed to? Or does he mean contemplating your own immigration, which is really emigration, not immigration? So I don't know if that's bad translation or just bad writing. Translator of this is Chris Lee, Krys, Chris Lee. So, you know, the first story I got a lot out of, there was definitely diminishing returns in stories 2 and 3, and then that fourth story just, so 3 stars. On to Ingeborg Bachmann's Malina. And when I read this, I thought Clarice Lispector, because like Lispector, this starts from the, you know, you're straight inside a character's head and they're pouring it all out. There's no real plot. It's just about what's inside a mind. And in this case, it's a woman who is has a passionate love for a married guy called Ivan. And it's never clear whether that's sort of consummated sexually or whether she's always just hankering after him. And the guy she lives with, who's called Molina, who is, I think, has a yearning for her but never acts on it. And he's always the guy she comes home to when, you know, he runs her life for her, effectively, all the little things of life, because she's a writer, she's an artist, so her head's slightly in the clouds anyway, which I can relate to. Or if she feels totally, you know, just hollowed out because she, you know, something's happened with Ivan and she can't have him, she always returns to Molina. But that's, you know, that's only part of the appeal of this book. So when there's dialogue with the two men individually, so with Ivan, it's always very fragmentary dialogue, and you know, Ivan is always so busy. You're never clear whether he's not sort of committing himself to Malina, to the writer because he's just too busy, or whether it's because he doesn't want to. And when she has a conversation with Molina, these are much more sort of, you know, wordy, drawn out, contemplative, thinking about the world. So there's that contrast. There's also letter writing forms a very important part of this book. She has a personal secretary until the personal secretary goes off to get married or have a child, I can't remember which. And this personal secretary is always doing the formal answering of letters where they're sort of asking the writer figure to come to an event or to give a reading or accept a prize or whatever. So she does all that side. But the writer figure herself also writes letters. She writes letters that she will never send. She writes them to important people almost as a second letter, what she really wants to say to these people who are extending all these invitations to her. And sometimes she signs them as, an unnamed woman or an anonymous woman, but she never sends them. And the book has a strikingly curious effect on you as you read it. You are so inside another person's head, and a strange psyche at that it's quite dizzying. It's quite vertiginous at times, which I really appreciated. And then there's one section about 2/3 of the way through, where the writer figure is just relaying one dream after another dream after another dream, which all involve her father, who was this authoritarian figure. There are implications of incest between him and his daughter, and they are just some of the best writing that I've come across. They are supreme. I'm just going to read a section from one of those dreams. I've reached the Black Sea, and I know that the Danube has to flow into the Black Sea. I will flow like it does. I've floated past all the riverbanks safe and sound, but before I reach the delta, then I see a fat body half covered with water. I cannot avoid it by wading into the middle of the river, since the river is too deep here and too broad and full of whirlpools. My father has hidden himself in the water before the mouth of the river. He is a gigantic crocodile with tired, drooping eyes that will not let me pass. There are no longer any crocodiles along the Nile. They brought the last ones to the Danube. Now and then my father opens his eyes slightly. He looks as though he was simply lying there idly, as if he weren't waiting for anything. But naturally, he's waiting for me. He knew I wanted to come home. That for me, coming home means salvation. Sometimes the crocodile opens his huge craving jaws. Shreds of flesh are hanging inside, flesh from the other women. And I think of the names of all the women he has devoured. Old blood is floating on the water, but fresh blood as well. I just think that's chilling and redolent, and there are elements of sort of, you're almost sort of having a psychoanalytic view of this character. When you're looking at her dreams, that's a dream obviously about father, authoritarianism, but the wish to come home, feeling perpetually unable to come home and all. There was so much I got out of this book, but does it all hang together? Does it tell you a story? Well, not really. It tells you a character, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think you have to be aware if that's not your type of thing. So I gave this 4.5 stars because I really enjoyed it. And on to Heart of the Original by Steve Aylett, which is a non-fiction book. Almost call it a bit of a manifesto or a j'accuse, because it is a sort of clarion call for true originality, true imagination, not to settle for, rather tired, limp recreations of things, whether acknowledged the original sources or not. And it's very punchy. In a way, I describe it as it's like a boxer who has another boxer on the ropes, and with one hand he's just thumping this guy in the face repeatedly. The guy is barely able to defend himself, but the guy won't be able to slip to the canvas because the attacking boxer is using his other hand to prop him up against the ropes so that he won't let him go down, so he can keep hitting him. This is what this book is like. It is a bit concussive in reading, but it's good fun. I have to say, a lot of the where he's quoting a few people he recognises as genuinely original. I'm not aware, I've never heard of them. I'm not aware of their work. So not only in literature, they're in all forms of artistic medium. But it is quite interesting where he sort of lances people who we take to be, original and innovative thinkers, when he provides, well, no, they're just rehashing this, or this is their version of that. That was quite enlightening, even if I'd never heard of the people that he was citing. And just to give you an example of the tenor of this book. The gargantuan quantity of fact and consequence denied and evaded by human beings must go somewhere. and may constitute dark energy, the mysterious gear thought to compose 70% of the universe. Thankfully, most of the universe contains no pain receptors. So, you know, good fun. I'm not sure it gets you anywhere. As an artist, it's like, yeah, you tell it, brother, how it is, but it's not telling me anything new. It sort of, you know, renews your faith, gives you a bit of vigour, but, you know. And finally, in terms of what I've read, All Day Permanent Read, the first battle scenes of Homer's Iliad, rewritten by Christopher Logue, who is a poet. And Logue, I think, has rewritten all the Iliad, but this was published, I think, about 2003 as a section, maybe the first section of it, certainly the opening battle scene of the Iliad. And he mixes modern and you know, the classical sort of technology, for example. And there's quite a few, you know, really delicious images in this book. So Hector trapped the child who made no mind, S-curving through these Trojans, hammering those. As many arrows on his posy shield as microphones on politicians' stands. So that's a nice image, you know, he's sort of charging through, they're shooting arrows at him, which he's catching in his shield, so that it resembles, you know, when you have a press conference with a politician, there's all the different TV broadcasters, microphones. That's a really nice image. You can see how it mixes the, you know, arrows on a shield with microphones on politicians' stands. So again, that mixture of modern and ancient. But I'm not sure what the point of this is, because I can see how, if he's rewritten the whole thing, I can see how it can be performed and should be performed. But to read, you know, not only as a sort of an extract of a longer piece, but even in its own terms, I didn't get a lot out of this. I couldn't see the point of it. As I say, I think it's meant to be performed. The one thing that was surprising is I've never seen that film 300. But, you know, the homoeroticism of that is very much on show in here. You know, the descriptions of Hector, you know, bestriding the battlefield in his chariot, going from one place to another, and his army, in his armour, and all this sort of stuff, and his charioteer and their relationship. But, yeah, so what? So this left me a little cold, I have to say. 2.5 stars. And just on to what I am reading. So, Anne Carson, Decreation. I've only just started this, but already this is going to be a winner, I think. It's my first Anne Carson. It's a mixture of poetry and essays. Anne Carson's Decreation starts with form and the undoing of form. Form is various here: opera, libretto, screenplay, poem, oratorio, essay list, montage. The undoing is tender, but tenderness can change everything, or so the author appears to believe. She contemplates decreation, an activity described by Simone Weil as undoing the creature in us, an undoing of self. But how can we undo self without moving through self to the very inside of its definition? Where else can we start? I mean, this is totally up my street. I read Weil a long, long time ago, and I'd forgotten about the concept of decreation, so it's good to revisit it with this. So, as I say, I've only read a bit, but I'm really enjoying this, and I want to try and finish this by the end of tomorrow, Saturday, because Sunday for me begins my participation in the James Joyce Ulysses Readathon that we've got going along, led by Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics. Follow the hashtag on BookTube for videos posted about it. My first time of reading it. I've never read this before. I think we have at least 10 people in our Voxer group who are all reading along. It formally starts tomorrow, Saturday. So, you know, jump in if you want to read it, whether you've read it before or whether you haven't. And as I say, we have a Voxer group. If you want to know how to join that, just pop me a comment below. I'll post the link to one or two of Alan's Ulysses related videos that he's already posted. So I'm going to look forward to this. I feel it's not a commute read. You know, I commute to and from work 4 days a week. I get a good 40 to 50 minutes read where I do most of my reading for the day. but it's a tube journey, so you know sometimes you have to lift your bag up or move your legs during the rush hour. So you know, I don't think this lends itself to that type of read. So my plan is to read. We're doing six sections or 6 chapters a month. So my plan is to read Fridays and Sundays, which means that for my commute reading, I have to find something else. And I'm quite keen not to take on any other sort of challenging fiction books, because I think that it will get sort of slightly muddied and lost against Ulysses. So what I plan is reading quite a lot of non-fiction. Why I've not written out any of my books by Marcel Benabo. Desert Divers by Sven Lindqvist. Works on Paper, essays by Elliot Weinberger. And I'll also be reading books I think are hopefully not that related. Science fiction, which is the 3-body problem. And also I'll be reading Robert Coover's, what's it called? The Universal Baseball Association. So all of these books, other than the 3-body problem by Sixian Lee, have been provided for me by Mitchell. And then the other book in that time I anticipate reading is, I picked this up in a bookshop yesterday, Body Tourist by Jane Rogers, which it looks a bit of a sort of mainstream book for my taste, but the reason I'm getting it is because when the rich die, their minds are stored digitally and they are transferred into the sleeping bodies of young volunteers, which sort of has a bit of crossover with my current work in progress, which I'm just about to finish. So I'm just intrigued to see how it's handled in this book. So there you have it, that's my Friday reads. Look out for my video probably on Sunday on Tim O'Brien's In the Lake of the Woods. All I'm going to say about this book in this video is this book has entered my top 20 books of all time. That's how good it is. Okay, so thanks very much. Till next time.